The Biden administration deserves huge credit for the economic measures it's been able to take against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. As an essay by Gary Huffbauer and Megan Hogan note, they are the most comprehensive imposed against a major power since the Second World War. On a punishment scale, they rank them as at least an 8 out of 10. But the unprecedented nature of these measures is producing concerns around the world that the United States has weaponized its financial power and could lead over time to the decline of the dollar's dominance, which is what gives America its financial superpowers in the first place. Let me tell you about 3 reports from 3 good sources that I trust. One comes to me from New Delhi, reporting on a conversation that took place at the highest levels of India's government. The topic, how to make sure that the US could never do to India what it has just done to Russia. The second from Brussels, where staff at the European Commission have been tasked, even while working with Washington on the sanctions, to find ways to reduce the role of the dollar in its energy imports. The third, a shrewd Asian observer of China speculated that the overly severe lockdowns in Shanghai, which even involved the rationing of food and basic supplies, might be part of an effort by Beijing to experiment with a scenario in which it faced economic sanctions from Washington, perhaps after an invasion of Taiwan. There is a raging debate going on right now about whether the dollar's total dominance of the international financial system is waning. Even Goldman Sachs and the IMF have warned that it might well happen. I tend to disagree. In my view, you can only beat the dollar with something better, and for the foreseeable future, there is no effective alternative. But it's clear that many countries, from China to Russia to even friendly nations like India and Brazil, are working hard on ways to reduce their vulnerability to Washington's whims. None of these efforts have so far gained much traction, though it's worth noting that the share of global foreign reserves held in dollars has declined from 71% to 59% over the last 2 decades. Now, partly this is because the United States appears less stable and predictable in the use of its extraordinary privilege. In the 2 decades preceding Russia's recent invasion, Washington massively ramped up sanctions for all kinds of reasons by more than 900%. Many of these measures have been overreactions and should be rolled back. After 9/11, Washington put in place highly intrusive measures aimed at tracking money going to terrorists. It has imposed harsh punishments on banks that do not adhere to all U.S. sanctions. It has sanctioned Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, Cuba, and others, often simply to satisfy domestic critics who wanted to do something but not pay much of a price. This kind of economic warfare has failed to change the regimes in any of these countries, but has caused widespread misery for ordinary people. Note that sanctions against Russia are aimed at policy change, not regime change, and therefore could be much more effective. Sanctions jumped up sharply during the Trump administration, which unilaterally withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and then threatened to impose sanctions on anyone who traded with Tehran, even though the Iranians had adhered to the deal, which took place under a UN framework. And then there are the measures pursued domestically by American regulators and judges, like the almost $9 billion penalty against the French bank BNP Paribas in 2014. Again, all these only work because of the power of the dollar. I support the sanctions against Russia, but President Biden needs to make a speech explaining them. He needs to make clear that the Russian invasion of Ukraine marks the most serious assault on the rules-based international system in decades. If it succeeds, it could tear apart that system. That is why Washington has worked with its allies to impose these extraordinary measures. He needs to detail the legal basis for America and its allies' actions. For example, how exactly can governments seize privately owned property for which the owner, even if he is a Russian oligarch, has clear legal title? How can people be sure that these powers will not be abused? Biden needs to emphasize that the U.S. will only take such measures in the future when there are blatant violations of international law on the scale of Russia's actions. The dollar maintains its crucial role in the international system because the U.S. is the world's largest economy. It has the most liquid debt markets. Its currency floats freely, and crucially, it is regarded as a country based on the rule of law and not one prone to arbitrary and unilateral actions. That last criterion is not one that Washington has lived up to in recent years. President Biden should make sure that in fighting this battle against Russia, he does not erode America's unique financial superpower.